This is Choices and Changes, written by Dahlia Rose 83 and read by Lalaspodfics. Summary. Draco doesn't want to become a Death Eater and turns to his aunt for help. Little did he know that this decision would change everything. Chapter 1. Andromeda Tonks had no idea what had possessed her to take on the job. Maybe it was Dumbledore's persuasion. The old man was good at talking people into things after all. Maybe it was the fact that the house felt way too empty now, with Ted and Nymphadora always away at work or doing business for the Order. Maybe she just felt bored and useless, sitting around at home. Why shouldn't she help the Order as well? Or maybe it was Sirius, her favorite cousin, nearly begging her to do it and keep an eye on Harry. Whatever the reason was, in the end she agreed, although she didn't really know what she was getting into. The job description had sounded simple enough. She was supposed to tutor the Hogwarts students, especially the 5th and 7th years, and help them with studying and homework problems. Probably the only good idea those ministry idiots had come up with concerning the school, which was probably the reason Dumbledore had agreed so readily. The only difficulty was hiring the right person for the job, before the ministry took it upon itself to appoint someone. No one wanted another Umbridge at Hogwarts. With Voldemort gaining strength, the Ministry still acting clueless and denying his return, and Dolores Umbridge messing up things at Hogwarts, Dumbledore and the other Order members felt it might be a good idea to have someone else from their ranks stationed at the school. Someone who was not a teacher and not close to Dumbledore and therefore wouldn't attract the attention of Umbridge, and that was where Andromeda came into the picture. She was a very qualified witch from a high-ranking pureblood family. The fact she had broken with most family members when she'd married Muggle-born Ted Tonks didn't count as much as her good grades from when she'd been a Hogwarts student herself. So she signed the contract, and before she knew it, she was back at Hogwarts, after so many years. Dumbledore gave her an old office, and students were informed about the possibility of tutoring. After a slight hesitation, quite a few of them took the offer. Most students wanted Andromeda to help them with the practical side of defense against the dark arts, and she felt bad every time she had to turn those students away. Dolores Umbridge had made very sure that she knew what she was allowed to do and what she wasn't. Despite the fact that Umbridge had only observed the first few tutoring sessions, she dared not risk going against those orders. Once word had gotten around that Andromeda would be no help with DADA, the interest in her tutoring sessions lessened considerably, so she spent most of her time sitting in her office, reading a book, waiting for the small handful of students who did show up. Harry and Ron were among the very few who came by regularly, but they mostly came to chat. She had only gotten to know Harry last year, when Dumbledore had finally agreed to let the boy move in with Sirius, whose name had been cleared thanks to Pettigrew's capture, and Remus. She was always a bit surprised by how open the boy was around her. Andromeda told him stories about Sirius and his childhood days when she had been close with her cousin. Sirius had been the only one in her family who stood by her when she decided to marry a Muggleborn. Being outcasts, they had always gotten on pretty well. Harry also sometimes asked her opinion about things he wanted to teach the other kids in the secret and very illegal defense class they had formed. She knew that Molly Weasley didn't want her children involved with the DA, as the kids called themselves, but she had to side with Sirius on this one. It was important that those children learned how to defend themselves, and the Ministry didn't leave them much of an alternative here. Aside from those visits by her two favorite boys, Andromeda's time at Hogwarts was rather boring. She almost regretted taking the job, because really, what good did her presence do? She wasn't even allowed to help those kids properly, because of all the restrictions the Ministry put on her, and Harry and his friends did really well without her help, which made her feel all the more useless. This somehow was even worse than sitting at home. But it all changed one day, with a visit she had never expected. It was late afternoon, and Andromeda was considering leaving the stifling confines of her office and going for a stroll outside when there was a tentative knock on her door. She called, "Come in," and was surprised when the door opened to reveal her nephew, Draco Malfoy. Draco closed the door behind himself and shuffled closer to the desk she was sitting at, looking like he wanted to bolt at any moment. "Please, have a seat. How can I help you?" Andromeda asked in a friendly voice, once she had gotten over her initial shock. It had been years since she'd seen the boy. Of course she saw him during meals, sitting at the Slytherin table, but only from afar. This was the first time in over 10 years that she saw him up close. She couldn't help but note how much he had grown or how much he looked like his father. But there was also a lot of Narcissa in him. Draco sat down across from her hesitantly, looking around like he expected to be watched. Can you guarantee me that this conversation is private? He finally asked. Of course. There's no one here but you and me, and I won't tell anyone that you're struggling with the subject, Andromeda promised, a little annoyed at the question. What did the boy think? That she would run around school telling everyone that she had to tutor him? Had Lucius really poisoned his feeling towards her so much? No one can listen in? He checked again. She rolled her eyes, grabbed her wand, and pointed at the door, muttering a quiet spell to lock and soundproof the room. Here! Now no one will be able to hear what we're talking about, even if they have their ears pressed against the door, she assured, wondering why the boy was so cagey. What was so bad about tutoring? Draco nodded, but didn't say anything. He simply sat there, staring at the wall, fidgeting. Looking at him more closely, Andromeda noticed the dark circles beneath his eyes and felt a surge of pity. She knew all too well what kind of man Lucius Malfoy was. If Draco was struggling, his father would be furious, and she also knew what he would do to his son if he felt that Draco had disappointed him in any way. Which subject do you need help with, Draco? She asked gently. Finally, he looked at her, and she almost flinched at the fear she could see in his eyes. I'm not here because of tutoring. I'm here because I need help, and I didn't know who to turn to, he admitted quietly. You're my aunt, and I thought... He broke off, averting his eyes. Andromeda felt her heart breaking a little at the sight. She reached out and covered his hand with hers, trying to ignore how he flinched away from the contact. I'll do whatever I can. What kind of help do you need? It took him a few minutes to find his voice. My father is a Death Eater, he finally muttered, daring to meet her eyes again. Andromeda nodded and motioned for him to continue. Draco swallowed hard. He wants me to serve the Dark Lord as well, says he has a task for me, so when I return home for the summer, I'm supposed to receive the Dark Mark. Andromeda gasped in shock. But you're only 15! Could Voldemort really stoop so low to recruit children to do his dirty work? I'll be 16 in June, Draco pointed out. I know, but that doesn't make it any better. You're still a child. The boy looked like he wanted to protest, but thought better of it. He was once again staring silently at the floor. You asked for my help, Andromeda remembered, trying to overcome her shock. It seemed to cost him a lot of willpower, but finally Draco met her eyes again. I don't want to serve him. I don't want to kill. The last was said so silently, she had to strain to hear him. But I can't disobey Father. He'll force me. The blonde choked on a sob, and he fell silent. He didn't need to say what his father would do if Draco refused. Andromeda could already guess. Her mind was racing, processing everything she had learned. She knew she couldn't make this decision on her own, yet she also knew she would protect this boy with everything she had. But he had to let her protect him. Slowly she got up and went around the desk, stopping next to him. She put a hand on his shoulder, again ignoring his flinch. I know people who can protect you, Draco, who can take you somewhere safe, but it would mean breaking with your father, choosing the other side. It would mean that you can probably never go home again, she warned. The boy sniffled, his cool facade crumbling. I don't want to become a Death Eater, he whispered brokenly. Then we will make sure that you won't be forced into Voldemort's service, she promised, noticing how he shivered at the name. It had taken her a long time to stop saying you-know-who, but Sirius and Dumbledore were right. It was stupid to be afraid of a name. It was giving Voldemort even more power, and she wasn't willing to do that. I'm going to contact some people. We will need to move you somewhere safe when the term ends, Andromeda explained. You understand what this means, right? You won't be going home for the summer, maybe not ever again. I think you'll be safe at Hogwarts, but during the breaks, you will need to go into hiding. He finally looked at her again, and she could see the tears in his eyes. I know. I won't let them harm you, Draco, she promised. He gave her a look she couldn't interpret, almost as if he was studying her, trying to make sure she was telling the truth. Thank you, he whispered finally. I wasn't sure you'd even believe me. She couldn't blame him. He didn't really know her after all. Lucius had made sure that they had no contact. She knew it must have taken a lot for him to come to her. And yet you asked for my help. Like I said, I didn't know who to turn to. Your family, and you were kind to me. When Mother and I stayed with you, the last sentence surprised her. You remember that? You were only 4 at the time, she murmured, her mind flashing back to the scared little boy he had been. I remember, was all he said, and she didn't prod him further. Okay, I'm going to contact those people as soon as I can. Come back here in 2 days. I'm sure I'll have news by then. He nodded, getting up and wiping his eyes discreetly. Andromeda pretended not to notice and busied herself lifting the spells. Draco took a step towards the door, but hesitated. "What about Mother?" he asked, turning back to face her. "He'll blame her, and he'll take his anger out on her." The thought had obviously just occurred to him, and Andromeda knew that he was right, but there wasn't much she could do. "I'll try to talk to her, but it's her decision, and if she doesn't leave on her own free will," she trailed off, looking apologetic. "But I'll try," she promised. He thanked her and left.